Here's a portion of an essay on the history of education that I wrote a few years ago with a recently added conclusion inspired by the reconstructivist perspective. The original essay began went back to the classical period in Greek history and Greek education. But I'm going to skip up to the 18th century right now because of time constraints, of course, and also interest constraints, I'm sure. We'll probably have about 3 clips. All right, in the 18th century, experimentally based, evidence-laden scientific thinking was rapidly replacing religious arguments among the most advanced thinkers. The Western world was rapidly changing, both technologically and politically, and the aristocratic order based on land and agriculture was becoming ever more irrelevant as wealth and power accumulated in urban manufacturing centers. Education, too, which at the highest level was the study of Greek and Latin, was also becoming irrelevant. In the 17th century, Harvard College, it was forbidden at Harvard College to speak in other than Latin and Greek. It was forbidden to speak English at all times during school sessions. Preparation for Harvard was provided by the Boston Latin Grammar School, which, battered and unbowed, continues to this day to offer a quality classical high school education to qualifying Boston students in the best of the essentialist and perennialist tradition. But by the end of the 18th century, an increasing number of English academies were being created, patterned after the one established in Philadelphia by Benjamin Franklin. These institutions taught reading and writing and arithmetic and surveying and navigation and bookkeeping and other technical subjects as they developed in the 19th century. It was apparent that a growing industrial society needed ever more technically trained workers, and that economic growth provided opportunities for the social advancement of all elements of society. Thus, education became linked with industrial growth, with economic growth, on the one hand, and social reform on the other. But industrial society is as hierarchical as the preceding feudal system, and this offended the very notion of equality that is the foundation of the social contract as it was formulated by Thomas Hobbes and then by John Locke in the 17th century. Around this contradiction, there arose a radical literature on radical movements aimed not at the amelioration of social inequality and injustices, but at the total restructuring of society. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, 1712-1778, who was a self-taught son of a watchmaker, was famous in his day for his radical views on society and education. He accepted the Lockean ideas of an original state of nature, of a social contract, and as the newborn mind as the tabula rasa, or the blank slate upon which experience writes. But he saw nature and natural laws in moral terms, stating at the beginning of his novel, Emile, quote, "Everything is good as it comes from the hands of the maker of things. Everything degenerates in the hands of man." Unquote. In the original state of nature, everyone was free and equal. Inequality and injustice arose as people formed governments and created class differences. A utopian society where all persons are equal would be based on the natural order, and the first step toward utopia is a radical restructuring of education, according to Rousseau. These themes, being a romantic view of humanity, of human nature, and a reified view of all of nature, a hatred of inequality, a hatred of hierarchy, a belief that society can be radically restructured through education, are central to most progressive ideologies current today. But attempts to extend naturalistic learning beyond the preschool years has had only limited success. The most influential progressive schools were the kindergartens that were modeled after the one founded by Friedrich Froebel, 1782 to 1852, to inculcate the philosophical notions about the unity and purposefulness of nature. Originally a complete schooling system, Frable's, the only valuable preschool part of Frable's kindergarten survives today. That's the only thing that survives. The problem of building a mass educational system on naturalistic, or what we would today call constructivistic, lines proved insurmountable. And by and large, the world has adopted a modified version based on the work of the German educators Herbart, H-E-R-B-A-R-T, and Ryan, R-E-I-N. This is the classroom system of instruction through material aids such as objects, charts, and diagrams. This was found to be necessary as the curriculum became too complex for, quote, the constructive activity of the youthful mind by itself to establish the connections between the manifest circle of ideas, unquote. The quote comes from Ryan in 1896. Progressivism is an anti-authoritarian, advocating that the student learn primarily from the student's experience, with a minimum of assistance from a mentor. In current terminology, teachers are to be facilitators, assisting but not determining their students' learning. This might be called a low authority approach to education. The standard classroom could then be called a medium authority approach, and the term high authority could be reserved for dogmatic schools committed to indoctrinating their students with a particular ideology or religion, or what we call today the essentialist and perennialist modes of education. This neutral terminology may help clarify some of the issues that are raised by the need of modern societies to educate everyone to a reasonably high level in finite time with a finite number of finite teachers. Throughout history, governments have attempted to set educational policies, usually through either unfunded or poorly funded mandates such as NCLB. Massachusetts, in the Act of 1647, require that every township, quote, after the Lord hath increased their numbers to 50 households, shall then forthwith appoint one within the town to teach all such children as shall resort to him, unquote. But Massachusetts' educational policies were always ahead of the other states. Religious differences among the states prevented the adoption of a national educational policy at the Constitutional Convention of 1787, and only 7 of the original 13 states included education in their constitution. Back with part 2 shortly.